What happens when a 35-year-old African president steps into a room full of global leaders and refuses to follow their script? When everyone expects him to plead, but instead he brings a bold proposal with the potential to transform an entire continent. Today's story unfolds in the polished power corridors of Riyadh, where billionaires shape the destiny of nations over coffee, and where one man's quiet defiance shifted the narrative. This isn't just a tale about money or diplomacy. It's about dignity, respect, and the impact of challenging the status quo. By the end of this account, you'll see why a single discussion in Saudi Arabia rippled across 3 continents and elevated a struggling nation to the status of equal partner, virtually overnight. At the King Abdulaziz Conference Center, the polished marble floors gleamed under the morning light, each surface reflecting like glass. Outside, Riyadh's skyline extended endlessly, its glass towers stretching skyward, symbols of wealth, ambition, and oil prosperity. Inside, the mood was thick with anticipation, the kind of tension that lingers whenever the world's most influential people gather. It was March 15th, and the Saudi Crown Prince's annual investment summit was about to begin. But this wasn't just another business gathering. It was a place where handshakes determined the fate of industries, and a single endorsement could sway an entire economy. The guest list read like a global directory of influence: tech moguls from Silicon Valley, oil tycoons from Houston, German industrial leaders, and powerful heads of state with the authority to shift policies with a signature. At 9 a.m. sharp, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman entered the Grand Hall. His presence immediately commanded attention. At 38, he had already begun reshaping Saudi Arabia's economic future, launching mega-projects worth hundreds of billions, and positioning the kingdom as a strategic bridge between East and West. His Vision 2030 initiative wasn't just changing Saudi Arabia, it was redrawing the map of the Middle East. Today, he would decide which global partnerships would earn access to his nation's considerable wealth. Since dawn, delegates had arrived. Private jets crowded the tarmac at King Khalid, international airport like luxury sedans at a gala. Each visitor came armed with proposals, presentations, and promises. They pitched ideas on renewable energy, artificial intelligence, space exploration, and smart cities. Everyone was competing for a share of Saudi Arabia's staggering $2 trillion public investment fund. Familiar faces filled the hall, along with some surprising names. The president of Singapore came to talk semiconductors. Brazil's foreign minister discussed agricultural tech. Even Estonia's prime minister was there with proposals for digital governance systems. But buried deep in the event's schedule, almost like an afterthought, was a name that drew puzzled looks: Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. The whispers started right away. Burkina Faso, that small, landlocked West African nation most couldn't even locate on a map? What was its leader doing at a summit meant for economic giants? After all, the country's GDP barely exceeded $15 billion, less than what some attendees spent. On corporate retreats, its infrastructure was outdated, resources limited, and global influence negligible. To many, it seemed laughable. "Why is he even here?" a German delegate asked. "What could Burkina Faso possibly offer Saudi Arabia?" But the answer to that question would soon redefine how power, partnerships, and potential are understood. Throughout the morning, presentation after presentation followed a familiar rhythm: sleek slides, impressive figures, polished executives in tailored suits, each delivering a perfectly practiced pitch. The Crown Prince listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and offered polite but non-committal replies. The setting was professional, yet impersonal, businesslike but cold. Then came the lunch break. Delegates mingled, discussed markets, and exchanged business cards. Saudi hosts floated through the crowd, warm yet reserved, maintaining the measured distance that often accompanies power. It was during this interlude that Ibrahim Traoré finally appeared. He was nothing like what anyone had imagined. At 35, he was younger than most of the CEOs present but carried a composed confidence that couldn't be ignored. Unlike the other delegates, he wasn't dressed in a Western-style business suit. Instead, he wore his country's traditional military uniform, not as a costume or cultural nod, but as a bold statement of identity and pride. The fabric was modest, the cut unremarkable, yet something about his bearing demanded attention. Gradually, conversations tapered off as people noticed him. Here stood a man who clearly didn't fit the mold of champagne deals and billion-dollar handshakes, yet somehow he looked entirely at ease. He didn't rush to network or toss around business cards. He simply observed. Patient, still, waiting by. The afternoon, many attendees were checking their watches, thinking ahead to dinner or flights. The Crown Prince had sat through hours of presentations, his focus visibly waning despite polite nods. Some guests had already started leaving. Then came the final speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso," the moderator announced. Polite applause followed, but it was tepid. The room clearly viewed this as a symbolic gesture, a nod to diversity rather than a genuine opportunity. Even the Crown Prince settled into his seat with the kind of patience one shows during routine formalities. Traoré approached the podium slowly. He had no laptop, no remote, no papers. The giant screens on stage remained blank. He simply stood there, silent, scanning the room, making brief eye contact with clusters of people. The quiet stretched just long enough to feel deliberate, just long enough to draw attention. Then he spoke. "Your Royal Highness," he began, "distinguished delegates, I have a question for you." The audience shifted. This wasn't the usual speech opener. No thank you for the invite. No diplomatic flattery. No economic data about Burkina Faso. "When you close your eyes and picture the future," he asked, "what do you see?" The room stirred again. "Unusual. Do you see taller skyscrapers, faster computers, smarter machines?" he continued. "Or do you see people, standing taller, walking prouder, dreaming bigger?" Crown Prince bin Salman's expression changed, just slightly. This wasn't a conventional investment pitch. Traoré stepped away from the podium, moving closer to his audience. "For 6 hours, I've listened to brilliant minds speak of market share, margins, and ROI. All valid, all important, but I've heard little mention of the one asset that truly builds wealth, human potential." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "Your Highness, your kingdom has made impressive investments around the world. In Silicon Valley startups, European manufacturing, and Asia's leading tech centers. You've formed alliances with countries that already possess wealth, strong infrastructure, and long-term stability. But if I may ask, when was the last time you invested in pure, unfiltered human potential?" The question lingered in the room like a quiet provocation. Some delegates exchanged looks. This was starting to feel less like a corporate pitch and more like a moral reflection. "I come from a place many of you may not recognize," Traoré continued. "Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. We don't have oil like some of our neighbors, nor diamond mines or bustling ports. But we do have something far more rare in the modern world. People who still believe that nothing is impossible." He reached into his jacket and pulled out something that caught the attention of those in the front row. It was a small, worn-out photograph. "This was taken 3 months ago in a village called Gango," he said, holding the photo high. "The boy you see is 10 years old. His name is Musa. Until recently, he had never seen electric light. His village had no power grid, no generator, nothing. When the sun went down, the world simply went dark." Though Traoré's voice was calm, a deeper emotion began to emerge. 3 months ago, we installed the first community solar panel in Gango, not with international aid or World Bank loans, but with funding we generated ourselves through better agricultural exports and smarter mining practices. And do you know what happened when the first bulb lit up Musa's home? The room had fallen into absolute silence. Even the crown prince had stopped tapping on his tablet. Musa didn't cheer. He didn't dance. He looked at his father and said, "Now we can study after dark. Now we can build." 10 years old, and his first instinct wasn't for fun or comfort. It was about learning and creating. Traoré slowly walked across the stage, making eye contact with the audience. "That photograph," he said, "is why I'm here, not to ask for charity, not for aid or donations, but for true partnership. A real, mutual partnership between countries that hold capital and those that hold hunger." He stopped in front of the Crown Prince's table. "Your Highness, you've spoken powerfully about transforming Saudi Arabia's economy beyond oil. You've backed artificial intelligence, renewable energy, tourism, and entertainment. All wise and forward-thinking moves. But may I offer this idea? Perhaps the greatest chance your kingdom has isn't in swapping oil for technology, but in trading simple transactions for lasting transformation." His words sent a quiet wave through the room. Delegates shifted in their seats. Few dared to address Crown Prince bin Salman this boldly, especially not representatives from countries whose entire economies were smaller than Saudi Arabia's annual surplus. But Traoré wasn't done. "Africa isn't here with a begging bowl," he said. "We're here with an offer. 54 nations ready to build together. With over 1 billion people, most under the age of 25, Africa is home to the youngest, most vibrant population on Earth. It spans a landmass abundant in minerals, fertile farmland, and untapped renewable energy sources. But what sets Africa apart as an investment destination is this: our story is still being written." He lifted a tablet, his first use of technology, and projected a straightforward map onto the screen behind him. It displayed the African continent, marked with a network of dotted lines stretching from west to east. "This is the Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor," he announced, a vast network of roads, railways, power grids, and communication systems linking Dakar to Djibouti. Spanning 8,000 kilometers across 12 nations, it represents the most ambitious infrastructure initiative in Africa's history. Remarkably, this vision wasn't crafted by foreign experts but by African engineers, economists, and planners. The atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. Delegates leaned forward. Phones were put away. Several attendees began to take notes. "The total cost of this project is $800 million, Traoré continued. "That's less than what Saudi Arabia spends on a single high-end resort. Yet the transformation it could bring would be immense. Picture this: West Africa's agricultural surplus flowing to East African ports. Solar farms in the Sahara powering industries from Senegal to Sudan. High-speed internet linking African universities to global research communities." Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was now fully engaged, leaning in, elbows on the table, focused. "And here's why this matters specifically to Saudi Arabia," Traoré said, turning to the prince. "This isn't solely about Africa's development. It's also about positioning your kingdom as a strategic connector. Every shipment traveling along this corridor could pass through Saudi ports. Every unit of energy could integrate with Saudi renewable technology. Every telecom line could be supported by Saudi infrastructure." He advanced the slide to show economic forecasts and projected trade flows. Even by conservative estimates, this corridor could boost trade between Saudi Arabia and Africa by 400%. "Within 10 years," he said. "More importantly, it would elevate Saudi Arabia's role, not just as a regional leader, but as a global connector, a nation that helped link Africa to Asia, Europe, and the Americas." The presentation grew more technical. financial models, implementation phases, but Traoré returned repeatedly to his core message: true partnership over one-sided aid, long-term investment over short-term charity, and meaningful change over superficial transactions. "Your Highness," he said as he moved to his final slide, "history remembers great kingdoms not for what they gathered, but for what they created. The Egyptians built pyramids, the Romans built roads, the British built ships. What will Saudi Arabia build?" he asked, ending the presentation and stepping forward once again. "I propose that Saudi Arabia build bridges, not just physical ones, but human bridges, economic bridges, between the world's youngest continent and its most visionary kingdom." The room was rapt. This was no longer a polite hearing. It had become a genuine strategic discussion. Then Traoré did something unexpected. He closed his tablet, stepped back from the podium, and addressed the room without any visuals or technology. "I must be completely transparent with you," he began, his voice clear and strong. "I didn't come here primarily to seek your investment." There was a moment of surprise in the audience. The Crown Prince's expression turned sharper, intrigued. "I came here to offer something far more significant," Traoré continued. "A chance to be part of something historic, not as a kingdom that grew wealthy from oil, but as one that helped others prosper through their own resources. Not as a nation that purchased influence, but as one that earned it, through respect and genuine collaboration." He paused, letting the words settle. "The Trans-Sahel corridor will be built, with or without Saudi involvement. Our countries are committed. We already have interest from Chinese partners, inquiries from European investors, and feasibility studies underway with American firms. We are not seeking rescue. We are seeking true partnership." The boldness of this statement was striking. A delegate from one of the world's least wealthy nations was telling one of the richest that their involvement was welcomed, but not essential. And yet Traoré pressed on. "If Saudi Arabia chooses to join us in this project, he won't just be investing in infrastructure, you'll be investing in the future of South-South cooperation. You'll be showing that true wealth is most powerful when it helps create more opportunities, not when it simply piles up." He began walking back toward the Crown Prince's table, but this time it didn't feel like a formal pitch. It felt more like a genuine exchange between equals. "Your Highness, you've spoken about Vision 2030 and Saudi Arabia's plan to become a global hub. But think beyond that. Imagine Vision 2050. Picture Saudi Arabia as the country that helped transform an entire continent. Imagine Saudi companies not just doing business in Africa, but thriving with Africa. Think about Saudi students attending African universities, built with Saudi investment, and African students conducting research in Saudi labs made possible by Africa's resources." The picture he painted was bold and far-reaching. It was a clear break from the usual donor-recipient dynamics that have long shaped North-South economic relations. "This is why I didn't bring a PowerPoint," Traoré said. "This is why I didn't come with a team of consultants or detailed financial forecasts. I came alone, leader to leader, offering a partnership built on equality." He stopped right in front of the Crown Prince, close enough to speak privately, yet still addressing the entire room. "Your Highness, I believe Saudi Arabia's greatest legacy won't be its tallest skyscraper, fastest train, or most advanced AI. It will be the moment the kingdom showed the world that true strength lies not in dominating markets, but in creating them. Not in owning resources, but in helping develop them. Not in buying loyalty, but in earning respect." The room fell completely silent. What had just unfolded was either one of the boldest diplomatic moves ever witnessed, or an outright career-ending gamble. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman remained still for several long seconds. His face gave nothing away. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Every delegate present sensed this was a critical turning point, an offer that could either spark a groundbreaking partnership or end in public failure. Finally, the Crown Prince spoke. His voice was soft, but it carried through the silence. "President Traoré," he said, "over the past 5 years, I've heard thousands of investment pitches. I've seen countless proposals, ideas, and promises. Almost all of them focused on what Saudi Arabia could offer: our wealth, our markets, our location, our influence." He paused, eyes fixed on Traoré. "You are the first person who's focused on what Saudi Arabia could become." Slowly, the Crown Prince stood. His movement alone drew attention across the room. As he rose to his full height, he began speaking again, this time to everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've just heard is exactly the kind of thinking that will shape the next century of global progress. President Traoré didn't come here asking us to solve Africa's challenges. He came here to invite us to be part of Africa's success." The Crown Prince moved from his place and approached Traoré, narrowing the space between them. His voice was firm but inclusive. "This is the kind of partnership Vision 2030 was meant to create. Cooperation built on mutual gains, shared growth, and deep respect for every partner's role." He stopped just in front of Traoré. Their exchange felt personal, yet the whole room was hanging on every word. "Mr. President," he said, "your Trans-Sahel infrastructure corridor is the kind of game-changing project that Saudi Arabia wants to support. Not because we view Africa as a charity case, but because we see Africa as a true partner in shaping the global economy of tomorrow." Turning back to the full audience, he continued, "Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund will commit $500 million to the first phase of the Trans-Sahel corridor. More funding will follow, depending on project progress and the level of participation from partner nations." The room reacted instantly. Some delegates audibly gasped. This wasn't just a major financial pledge. It marked a shift in how Saudi Arabia saw its role in African development, but the Crown Prince wasn't finished. "Additionally," he said, "Saudi Arabia will establish an African Partnership Office in Riyadh was established with a clear purpose: to identify and develop opportunities for South-South cooperation. President Traoré was invited to chair the advisory board for this new initiative, a gesture that was anything but ordinary. Traditionally, African leaders had visited Saudi Arabia as guests of ceremony or to seek support, but rarely as equal contributors to shaping Saudi policy." Traoré accepted the offer with a calm nod, though his eyes revealed the weight of the moment. This was about more than investments or infrastructure. It was about dignity, mutual respect, and the realization that true partnership could hold greater power than one-sided aid. "Your Highness," Traoré said, "this partnership will be remembered as a turning point, when the Global South began to collaborate instead of compete, when wealth became a means to generate shared prosperity, not just individual accumulation." The Crown Prince responded with his first sincere smile of the day. "Mr. President, I believe you're absolutely right. And I believe this alliance will benefit both our nations far beyond what we can currently foresee." The formal meeting ended with reserved applause, but the real momentum was in the informal discussions that followed. Delegates from other African countries quickly gathered around Traoré, eager to explore how their own nations could engage with this new model. Meanwhile, European and American diplomats began reassessing how this emerging Saudi-African alignment might reshape their own relationships on the continent. Yet, the most meaningful exchange took place quietly, away from cameras and microphones. As the attendees began to leave the hall, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approached President Traoré. "Mr. President," he said in a low voice, "your presentation today was not only compelling, it was essential. Saudi Arabia has been seeking meaningful partnerships, not just transactional arrangements. Today, you've shown us what that truly means." Traoré nodded in acknowledgement. "Your Highness, Burkina Faso has learned that dignity outweighs dependency, and partnership is stronger than patronage. Today proved that these ideas can be implemented, not just discussed." The Crown Prince extended his hand, not merely as a diplomatic formality, but as a gesture marking the start of what felt like a genuine alliance. "Mr. President, I believe this marks the beginning of a transformation for both our regions." As news of the partnership spread beyond the conference walls, the reaction was swift and far-reaching. African stock markets rallied, with investors quickly understanding the long-term implications of Saudi-backed development. Social media lit up with commentary, hailing the initiative as a fresh model of global cooperation. Young Africans shared clips of Traoré's remarks, adding captions like, "This is real leadership," and, "Finally, someone speaking on equal footing." International media offered extensive but varied coverage. Western outlets focused largely on the geopolitical consequences, speculating how this new Saudi-African alignment might impact Europe and the United States' influence in Africa. Chinese media stressed the competitive aspect, noting potential challenges for China's Belt and Road strategy. In contrast, Middle Eastern publications highlighted the initiative as proof of Saudi Arabia's expanding role on the global stage. Perhaps the most notable response, however, came from African leaders themselves. Within 48 hours of the Riyadh announcement, presidents and prime ministers across the continent began contacting both Saudi Arabia and Burkina Faso, eager to find ways to participate in this evolving framework for global cooperation. Cooperation Ikatitude. President of Senegal reached out to discuss linking Dar to the Trans-Sahel corridor. Meanwhile, Ethiopia's prime minister expressed interest in extending the network to align with Chinese-built infrastructure already in place. Even South Africa's leadership began considering how their more advanced economy could support the broader continental initiative. What made these responses especially notable was their sincerity. These weren't standard diplomatic gestures or routine declarations of support. They were genuine inquiries from leaders who recognized a significant shift in how African nations could now engage with international partners. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, the reaction was enthusiastic. Citizens gathered around radios and TV screens to hear news of their president's diplomatic success. For a country long used to being overlooked or patronized by global players, seeing their leader treated as an equal by one of the world's major powers carried deep significance. Yet, President Traoré remained focused on progress rather than praise. In interviews after returning from Riyadh, he consistently highlighted that the real challenge was still ahead. "A handshake in Saudi Arabia means nothing if we can't deliver results in Africa," he told journalists. "Partnership is proven through performance, not promises." This pragmatic mindset shaped the steps that followed. Instead of organizing lavish ceremonies or announcing impractical deadlines, Traoré's administration began laying the groundwork for meaningful development. The first tangible action was setting up the Trans-Sahel Coordination Office in Ouagadougou, staffed jointly by Burkina Faso officials and Saudi technical experts. Their mission was clear yet ambitious: turn the corridor from idea to reality within 5 years. Saudi Arabia's support turned out to be more than symbolic. Within 3 months of the Riyadh summit, Saudi engineers were conducting feasibility studies across the Sahel. Construction firms from Saudi Arabia were already bidding on early-stage contracts, while Saudi banks established links with African financial institutions. Crucially, the partnership maintained a strong focus on equality and shared benefit. Instead of simply injecting Saudi funds into African projects, the collaboration prioritized knowledge sharing and skills development. African engineers worked side by side with Saudi specialists. African economists played an active role in project planning. Local companies were given priority for construction roles. This model held broader implications well beyond the project itself. For decades, Africa's development had often been shaped by dependency on colonial legacies, Cold War alliances, or rising powers like China. The Saudi partnership signaled a new approach, cooperation between developing countries based on mutual strengths, not imbalanced hierarchies. The impact reached further than economics. Young Africans began to see international relations in a new light, not as something imposed on them, but as a space they could influence. Universities across the continent launched new programs focused on South-South cooperation and diplomatic innovation. Think tanks began publishing research exploring alternative forms of global partnership. 6 months after the Riyadh meeting, the first section of the Trans-Sahel Corridor officially broke ground. The event was intentionally understated but carried great symbolic weight. Instead of inviting foreign dignitaries for an extravagant affair, the ceremony featured local leaders, regional engineers, and the workers who would build the road. Traoré's speech at the event summed up the importance of the moment. Today, we don't just break ground for a road. We break ground for a new way of working together. We show the world that nations can collaborate on equal terms. Partnership proved to be far more impactful than patronage. Dignity turned out to be more meaningful than charity, and the Global South began to craft its own narrative of growth and success. Road construction progressed smoothly, with Saudi technical knowledge combining effectively with African labor and local resources. The results exceeded early expectations. More importantly, the project created substantial employment for local communities and helped develop technical expertise that would outlast the construction itself. By the end of the first year, the success of the partnership was unmistakable. The Trans-Sahel Corridor was not only ahead of schedule but also under budget. Trade between Africa and Saudi Arabia had risen by 60%. Even more notable, the partnership had sparked similar initiatives across the Global South. Brazil initiated infrastructure discussions with Nigeria. India expanded its presence in East Africa's tech sector. Mexico developed new trade connections with manufacturing hubs in North Africa. The Saudi-African collaboration became a blueprint, fueling a growing web of South-South partnerships that were gradually reshaping global economic ties. However, the most profound outcome wasn't reflected in numbers or trade data. It lay in the shift in how countries approached global collaboration. The traditional model, where wealthier nations gave aid to poorer ones, was now joined by a fresh approach, developing countries partnering on the basis of shared strengths and mutual respect. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman highlighted this shift during a speech commemorating the first anniversary of the Riyadh summit. President Traoré showed us that leadership isn't about having all the answers, he said. It's about asking the right questions. He didn't look to us to fix Africa's problems. Instead, he invited us to be part of Africa's solutions. That invitation didn't just reshape Saudi-African relations, it redefined the very essence of global partnership. For his part, President Traoré remained focused on the results rather than accolades. When asked about the diplomatic breakthrough, he consistently credited the shared effort. This partnership worked, he said, because it was built on honesty, not flattery, mutual benefit, not one-sided charity, and respect, not pity. He believed these principles could succeed anywhere, if leaders had the courage to adopt them. The events of that day in Riyadh evolved from a diplomatic milestone into a model for modern international relations. It demonstrated that dignity and partnership weren't just noble ideals, they were effective strategies, delivering stronger results than traditional aid-dependent models. As the first phase of the Trans-Sahel Corridor neared completion, its influence was already clear. New businesses began to flourish along the route. Educational opportunities expanded in the connected towns. Most importantly, young Africans started to view their continent differently, not as a region in need of rescue, but as one that was actively shaping its own future. What began with one man's decision to reject charity and extend an offer of collaboration had blossomed into a broader movement. It became a model that inspired new alliances across the global South, redefining what global cooperation could look like in an interconnected era. And in Gango, the small village where the journey began, 10-year-old Musa now studied under electric light. He dreamed of becoming an engineer, growing up in a world where African leadership was transforming the way nations relate to each other. The boy in the photograph had come to symbolize what could be achieved when partnership replaced patronage, when dignity outweighed charity, and when leaders demanded respect instead of appealing for sympathy. The transformation had taken root, but the real impact was only just beginning.